Welcome back, fellow explorers of the mind. It's clear that you're not just here for entertainment. You crave something deeper, a real understanding of the human experience.
And today, well, today's journey is going to take us to the very heart of that.
Yes, into a space that for a very long time remained incredibly private and inaccessible.
Exactly. We're diving deep into O Livro Vermelho, maybe better known as Liber Novus, the new book.
The Red Book by Carl Jung, this is a big one.
Oh, it really is. We're talking about a massive red leather-bound folio.
Striking image. I remember the first time I saw it, the sheer size of it.
And within that, contained inside, Jung meticulously documented his psychological explorations.
His self-experimentation, almost like a map of his own psyche.
Yes, exactly. His observations, his introspections, all chronicled over a period spanning from 1913 to roughly 1930.
And what's incredible, too, is that this wasn't just a sudden burst of creativity. This was rooted in even earlier explorations.
Right. It grew out of his black books, his personal diaries, which he also began in 1913. So we're talking about a continuous thread of inner exploration.
Okay, so we have the Red Book, Liber Novus, and the Black Books as our primary sources. Now, what makes this deep dive so compelling is that something this fundamental to Jung's thought, to his entire approach to psychology, remained hidden from public view for decades.
It's astonishing, isn't it? Think about it. This was a period of creation starting over a century ago, and yet it wasn't until 2009 that a facsimile edition, a meticulously produced copy of the original, was published. That's when it truly became accessible for serious study, complete with an English translation and tons of annotations.
And then a few years later, in 2012, they released a reader's edition, which was a little bit easier for, well, let's be honest, for the rest of us to digest.
Absolutely. Now, before we plunge into the depths of the Red Book, we need to grasp the historical context, the world Jung was inhabiting during this period of intense self-inquiry.
Absolutely crucial. We're talking about 1913, the same year Jung's close collaboration with Sigmund Freud came to an end. That split, that intellectual and personal break, seems to have been a catalyst for a lot of what unfolded.
No doubt about it. It prompted Jung to embark on a profound reassessment, both personally and professionally. And this all took place as the world was teetering on the brink of World War I.
The backdrop of global conflict. So much change and upheaval swirling around him.
Exactly. And as we delve into Jung's inner world during this time, one of the first questions that inevitably arises is the very nature of this intense inner work.
Right. What was he actually experiencing? Some might say a creative illness. Others might see it as a deep dive into introspection.
Or even potentially a break with reality.
And then there's the perspective that this was simply an extraordinary period of self-discovery, unlike anything else.
There's a fascinating range of interpretations out there. Take Anthony Storr, for example. He read Jung's own words, where he mentioned feeling threatened by a psychosis, and took that quite literally, concluding that Jung was indeed experiencing a psychotic episode.
Okay, so that's one perspective.
But then you have Sonu Shamdasani, who you could say was absolutely instrumental in getting Liber Novus published.
I mean, he dedicated years of his life to this project.
He did. And Shamdasani argues that, while intense, Jung's experience was far more deliberate and controlled than a true psychosis. He points to the extensive documentation that suggests a much more conscious process.
So a clash of interpretations right from the start.
And it's worth noting that Jung himself seemed to anticipate this kind of debate. He wrote, "For the superficial observer, it will look like madness." Almost as if he was saying, look, I know this might seem strange from the outside, but there's more to it than meets the eye.
It's like he was acknowledging that diving this deep into the unconscious, into the uncharted territory of the psyche, would be met with resistance. That some would simply label it as insanity.
Right. And here's something else that's absolutely crucial to understanding this period. Jung called these inner explorations his night work, the time he spent with Liber Novus. But here's the thing. Even while he was doing this incredibly intense night work, he was also fully engaged in his day work. He didn't just retreat from the world.
Meaning he was still seeing patients.
Yes. He maintained a busy professional practice, reportedly seeing an average of 5 patients every single day. He was actively involved in research, delivering lectures, writing, and participating in various professional associations.
So he was living in both worlds simultaneously.
Precisely. He was grappling with these powerful inner experiences, these visions, and at the same time trying to make sense of them in relation to the human psyche, in relation to his patients, in relation to the world around him.
He wasn't just lost in an internal world detached from reality.
Not at all. And if we need further evidence of that, just consider this. During World War I, Jung served as an officer in the Swiss army. He was actively engaged for extended periods between 1914 and 1918.
Wow. So in the midst of this profound inner journey, he was also dealing with the very real demands of wartime service.
Exactly. It shows a remarkable capacity to navigate both the internal and external worlds. And it's against this complex backdrop that we need to approach Jung's own description of his Liber Novus experience. He called it my most difficult experiment.
Experiment. That word really jumps out.
It does, because it suggests intentionality, a deliberate process of exploration. And this experiment, for Jung, was a conscious and deliberate confrontation with the unconscious, with the hidden depths of his own psyche. And he did this through what he called mythopoetic imagination.
Okay, now we're getting into some serious Jungian territory. Can you unpack that term a bit? Mythopoetic imagination.
Think of it this way. Jung wasn't just daydreaming. He wasn't simply letting his mind wander aimlessly. He was actively engaging with his imagination in a very specific way.
So how did he do that?
Sonu Shamdasani, who, as we said, spent years studying this, describes it as Jung deliberately evoking a fantasy in a waking state. And then, instead of just observing it passively, he would actively enter into it, like an actor stepping onto a stage.
Almost as if he was becoming a participant in a play unfolding within his own mind.
Yes, exactly. Jung described it as dramatized thought in pictorial form. He would visualize a scenario, a character, a symbol, and then he would engage with it, interact with it, almost like having a conversation.
And what was the driving question behind this experiment? What was he trying to uncover?
Jung wanted to understand what happened when he switched off consciousness. He was fascinated by the spontaneous symbolic activity of dreams and wanted to see if he could tap into something similar while awake. He was trying to access a deeper symbolic language of the unconscious.
And that's where the black books come into play, right?
Exactly. Those 6 black-covered journals became his laboratory notebooks for this self-experimentation. It's where he initially recorded his visions, his fantasies, his imaginations. He used all these terms in his early notes.
So the black books were like the raw, unfiltered data from his inner explorations.
Yes, very much so. And they began in November 1913 and became incredibly intense through the summer of 1914, although he continued to write in them for years into the 1930s.
A fascinating glimpse into his process.
Yes. And one of Jung's students, Barbara Hanna, who knew him later in his life, made a really insightful comparison. She likened Jung's encounters with these inner figures and images to Menelaus's encounter with Proteus in the Odyssey.
The shape-shifting sea god.
Exactly. Menelaus has to wrestle Proteus and hold him tight to get him to reveal his prophecies. And Hanna pointed out that Jung had this very specific rule. He would never let any figure or image he encountered in his inner world just vanish or disappear without engaging with it, without demanding to know its purpose.
So he was actively wrestling with his unconscious, demanding answers, demanding meaning.
Yes, he was trying to decipher the language of his own psyche. And then a pivotal moment occurred with the outbreak of World War I in August 1914. This global catastrophe had a profound effect on Jung's understanding of his own inner experiences.
It must have felt like the world was going mad.
Absolutely. And in the midst of this collective insanity, Jung had a realization. His visions, the things he was experiencing internally, weren't just personal quirks or psychological dramas limited to his own mind. He began to see them as deeply interconnected with the larger historical moment, with the collective anxieties and upheavals of the time.
It was like his inner world was reflecting the outer turmoil.
Precisely. And it was this realization, the sense of a broader significance to his inner explorations, that led to the creation of Liber Novus, the Red Book, as a distinct work.
So he took the raw material from the black books, those initial journal entries, and started shaping them into something more coherent, more deliberate.
Yes. Between late 1914 and 1915, he began compiling those annotated diary entries into a more organized manuscript. This marked the initial stage of what would eventually become Liber Novus. And then, starting in 1915, he began the incredibly demanding task of transcribing this draft into the large, illuminated calligraphic folio we now know as the Red Book.
So he was giving it form, giving it permanence.
Exactly. And in 1917, as his inner explorations continued, he compiled yet another manuscript, a supplementary text titled Scrutinies. This contained further visionary material and his own commentaries on those experiences. It, too, was intended to be incorporated into the Red Folio.
So the work kept expanding, deepening.
It did, and it's remarkable when you think about it that he dedicated 16 years of his life to this project, to transcribing and illuminating these manuscripts. But here's the fascinating thing. He never actually finished transcribing everything into the Red Book.
Really?
By 1930, after 16 years of intense, meticulous work, he had only transcribed about two-thirds of the material. It's a testament to the sheer volume and complexity of his inner explorations.
But thankfully, the published edition of O Livro Vermelho, Liber Novus, includes all of the manuscript material. We get to see the full scope of his work, even the parts he didn't manage to transcribe into the Red Folio.
Absolutely. And decades later, reflecting back on this pivotal period, Jung didn't shy away from its importance. In 1957, in an interview with Agnella Jaffe, he stated very clearly, "The years when I pursued the inner images were the most important time of my life. Everything else is to be derived from this."
So he considered this the foundation of his entire psychological framework.
Yes, he called it the numinous beginning, the raw material from which all his later work flowed. Everything that came after he saw as essentially refining, elaborating, and integrating those core insights into a more systematic understanding of the human psyche.
And then, in 1959, he added that brief but poignant epilogue to the book. For the superficial observer, it will look like madness. Almost a final word of caution, a reminder that this kind of deep inner work can be easily misunderstood.
Now, shifting gears a bit, let's delve into the physical creation of this extraordinary object. This wasn't just a matter of scribbling notes in a notebook. Jung approached the creation of the Red Book with an artist's eye. He used a calligraphic pen, multicolored inks, and gouache to bring his visions to life on the page. The text itself is primarily in German, his native language, but he also incorporated Latin quotes from the Vulgate, as well as Latin and Greek inscriptions and names.
A testament to his vast knowledge and the way he wove together different intellectual and spiritual traditions.
Exactly. And there's even a brief English quote from the Bhagavad Gita indicating a broad range of influences. The first 7 folios, the Liber Primus section, were particularly striking in their visual style. They were actually created on parchment, not paper, and executed in a very ornate, illuminated medieval style.
Intriguing.
It was a deliberate choice to evoke that sense of historical and perhaps even archetypal significance. However, he encountered a practical problem with those early parchment leaves. The ink tended to bleed and flake.
So he switched to paper.
Yes. And in 1915, he commissioned the creation of the iconic red leather-bound folio that we now associate with the Red Book. It was a substantial volume, about 11.57 inches wide and 15.35 inches tall.
Wow, a real statement piece.
And it was created with roughly 600 blank pages of high-quality paper. And of course, the red leather binding was adorned with beautiful gold tooling.
And on the spine, the formal title, Liber Novus, embossed in gold.
Yes. To ensure the preservation of his early work, he carefully interleaved the original parchment leaves from Liber Primus at the beginning of this new volume. However, despite 16 years of work, he only filled about 191 of those 600 pages.
So a huge portion remained blank.
It does make you wonder what else he might have filled those pages with. The completed sections comprise 205 pages of text and illustrations. That includes 53 full-page images, 71 pages with both text and art, and 81 pages of pure calligraphic text.
And where is this remarkable artifact house today?
It resides in a bank vault in Zurich, Switzerland, alongside other valuable and private materials from the Jungian archive.
A fittingly secure location for such an irreplaceable treasure. Now, during Jung's lifetime, this book wasn't exactly widely known, was it?
No, it wasn't. While it seems he often kept it in his office and a number of people may have seen it, very few were actually allowed to read its contents. And after his death in 1961, his heirs kept it private for many years, denying access to scholars who wanted to study it.
So how did it finally come to be published? What changed?
Well, it was a long process. The decision to publish was finally made in 2000, almost 40 years after Jung's death. A major factor in this decision was the work of scholar Sonu Shamdasani,
who we've already mentioned a few times.
Right. He'd uncovered a significant number of private transcriptions of parts of the Red Book in various archives. This discovery, I think, made it clear that publication was possible, and more importantly, that it would be of immense value to the world.
It was too important to keep hidden away.
Exactly. The Fielman Foundation provided the funding for the editorial work, which was extensive. And then when the facsimile edition was finally published in October 2009, there were public exhibitions of the original Red Book. People could actually see this remarkable artifact firsthand.
Incredible. So from a hidden treasure to a public exhibition.
It's a testament to the power and the enduring relevance of Jung's work.
So wrapping things up, as we reach the end of this deep dive into Liber Novus, the Red Book, it's clear that this is far more than just a book, a physical object. It's a record of a profound inner journey.
A journey that fundamentally shaped the development of Jung's entire psychological framework.
And it speaks to his courage and his willingness to delve into the deepest, often most unsettling parts of his own psyche.
Especially during a time of immense global upheaval when the world itself seemed to be losing its mind.
And by understanding the origins of Jung's ideas, the raw material of his thinking, as documented in Liber Novus, we gain a much richer appreciation for all his later writings.
Absolutely. It provides a whole new lens through which to view his work.
And this leads to a question for all of us listening. If Jung, one of the most influential figures in psychology, felt compelled to embark on such an intense exploration of his own unconscious, what might that mean for us? What might we discover if we were willing to confront the hidden depths of our own psyches?
It's a daunting but potentially transformative prospect, wouldn't you say?
Indeed. And with that thought-provoking question, we'll bring this deep dive to a close.
Until next time, keep exploring.
Keep asking questions and keep diving deep.
Guys, see you in another podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.